Welcome back, everyone. If you're here for a good scary story, you're in the right place. Every nightmare begins with something ordinary. A phone call, a text, a stranger, a single moment that doesn't seem important until it's far too late. And tonight, you're about to hear one of those stories. Tonight, you're about to hear a dark story where an abandoned sawmill and a forest after midnight become more than just a setting. They become part of the nightmare, with people claiming they still hear a ghostly lumberjack's footsteps, and sometimes even the faint echo of an axe cutting through the dark. Lock the door, look over your shoulder one last time, and let's dive into tonight's nightmare. People always say the same thing when they hear a story like this. Oh, right, based on a real event. And most of the time, that's just a cheap way to make people lean in. But this one came from a place where nobody had any reason to lie, and nobody had any reason to talk about it either. That's what makes it hard to sit with. I'm telling it the way it was told to me, and the way I lived through it, because I don't think I'll ever get it out of my head any other way. It started in Black Hollow, Oregon, which is the kind of town you drive through if you blink too long and miss it. One diner, one gas station, one church, one hardware store with a cracked neon sign that only half worked in the rain. A sawmill on the edge of town that had been shut down for 12 years and still smelled like wet pine and old grease whenever the wind shifted. Everybody knew everybody else. Everybody knew your business before you did. And everybody had the same look when they talked about the woods north of town. Not fear exactly. More like they were trying not to remember something. I'd gone back there in late October because my Aunt June had had a stroke, and I was the only family within driving distance. I'd been living in Seattle, working sound for small productions and podcasts, doing whatever paid the rent. Black Hollow was the last place I wanted to be, which is probably why it was the first place my life decided to get strange. Aunt June raised me half the summers after my mother died, and she was the kind of woman who could shut down a room with one look. She'd lived in that town for 50 years, never moved, never complained, never said much unless it mattered. The first night I got there, she was lying in her hospital bed, awake but weak, one side of her face slack. She squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt. "Don't go into the timber after dark," she said. I gave her a tired smile. "June, I'm not 12. She stared at me with that sharp, almost annoyed expression she'd always had. "I'm serious, Ben. If you hear chopping, you stay where you are." "Chopping?" She shut her eyes like she'd said too much. "Just promise me." So I promised, because people in hospitals ask for promises they don't really expect you to keep. I stayed in her house out on Alder Road while she recovered. It was one of those old clapboard homes with a sagging porch, a wood stove, and windows that rattled every time a truck passed on the main road. The first 2 nights were quiet enough. Too quiet, actually. The third night I woke up at 2:14 a.m. to the sound of an axe hitting wood. Not outside, not far away. Right there. 3 slow chops. Then another 3. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, and listened. Nothing. Then, from somewhere beyond the back fence and the line of spruce trees behind the house, I heard a man's voice. Low, hoarse, tired in a way that sounded older than age. "Back up now," it said. I got out of bed with my heart thumping stupidly hard, grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, and went to the kitchen window. The yard was empty, moonlight on wet grass. The old pickup parked under the maple. No movement, no footprints, nothing. Then I saw it. At the far edge of the tree line, maybe 50 yards back, a light bobbed once between the trunks. A lantern. Not a flashlight, not a headlamp. A real lantern, the old kind with a yellow glow, carried low and steady by someone moving through the trees. I watched it for maybe 10 seconds before it vanished. I stood there a long time, half expecting laughter, a truck door slamming, anything normal. Nothing. In the morning I told myself I dreamed it. Then I went outside and found a fresh wood shaving on the back steps. One long curling strip of pine, pale and damp, like it had been cut minutes earlier. A week later, I mentioned it to the woman at the diner, mostly because I was tired and stupid and wanted someone to tell me I was imagining things. Her name was Ruth Kessler. She'd run the counter for 20 years and had the kind of face that looked permanently unimpressed with the universe. I asked, casual as I could manage, "You ever hear anybody out by the woods at night?" She didn't even look up from wiping a coffee mug. "Depends what you mean by hear. Chopping, like an axe." That got her attention. She set the mug down and finally looked at me. "You a friend of June's?" "Yeah." She studied my face a second too long. Then she said, "You're not from around here." "No kidding." She leaned in a little and lowered her voice. "Then here's some free advice. If you hear chopping after midnight, don't go looking for who's doing it. Folks who go looking usually get themselves turned around." "Turned around where?" She gave me a flat look. "In the timber, sweetheart. Where else?" I probably should have laughed it off, but there was something in her tone that made my skin tighten. At the counter behind me, old Mr. Danner muttered, "Kids these days never learn." I turned. "What does that mean?" He didn't look at me. "Means some things in this town are older than common sense." Ruth picked up the coffee pot again. "We call him the logger." I snorted. "Seriously?" "No," she said. "Not seriously. Not ever. But that's what people call him." I waited. She sighed like I was making her work too hard. "Old logging foreman. Died up on Northridge years ago. Maybe 30, maybe 40. Depends who you ask. Some say he froze to death. Some say he got lost. Some say he just kept walking and never came back." "What's his name?" "Eli Mercer." Mr. Danner finally looked up. "That's not the name people use." "What name do they use?" He took a slow sip of coffee, the one he answered to. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Ruth muttered, "Don't start that." But the old man just stared at me and said, "If you hear him say your name, son, don't answer." I laughed a little too loudly because I didn't know what else to do. Neither of them laughed back. That should have been my clue to pack up and leave right then. Instead, I started asking questions. Over the next few days, I heard the same story from enough different people that it stopped sounding like a story and started sounding like a scar. Back in the late 70s, the mill had been running around the clock. Mercer was a foreman, hard as old leather, always first in the woods and last out. Big man, broad shoulders, red beard, wore the same wool coat in every season. According to some, he was the best logger in the county. According to others, he was the reason men got hurt. And according to everybody, he vanished during the first heavy freeze of '79. Officially, it was an accident. Unofficially, the stories changed depending on who was drinking. Some said he walked off after a fight with the mill owner. Some said he found something buried near the old cut line and wouldn't shut up about it. Some said he got trapped under a falling tree and the crew just never found him. One old-timer, a retired mechanic named Vic Hale, told me this while we were both standing outside the hardware store under a flickering awning. "Listen," he said, scratching at his beard. "You ever work with a man long enough, you know his footsteps, know his cough, know the way he spits when he's mad. Mercer was like that. You'd hear him before you saw him." "And?" Vic stared out at the road. "And after he disappeared, folks kept hearing him. Like a haunting." Vic barked a humorless laugh. "Like work." That line stuck with me. Like work. Because that's exactly what it sounded like. The chopping came again the next night. Not in the woods this time, on the roof. One heavy impact after another, as if somebody was up there splitting shingles with an axe. I dragged myself downstairs, grabbed the porch light, and stepped out into freezing air. Nothing on the roof, nothing in the yard. But the smell hit me first. Fresh sap. Then I noticed the marks on the front steps. 3 deep gouges in the wood, as if something heavy and sharp had been dragged down them. I crouched and touched one of the grooves. The wood was warm. That was when I stopped pretending. The next morning, I went to the county archives, which were housed in a little basement room under the library. The clerk there, a cheerful college kid who clearly hated his life, let me dig through old newspapers and property records for an hour before asking what I was looking for. "I don't know yet," I said. He gave me a look like I was a complete lunatic. Maybe I was. I found the article about Eli Mercer in a brittle clipping from February 1980. Missing foreman presumed dead after winter storm. There was a black and white photo of a crew outside the mill, all hard faces and cigarette smoke. Mercer stood in the middle with one hand on an axe handle, looking away from the camera. He had a wide forehead, a thick neck, and a beard that made him look half bare. What got me wasn't his face, it was the expression. Not angry, not scared, alert, like he'd heard something everyone else had missed. The article itself was short. 1 paragraph about weather conditions, 1 paragraph about the search, 1 quote from the sheriff saying there was no evidence of foul play. That was it. But clipped to the back of the folder was something handwritten in a different ink, likely by some local archivist years ago. Mercer House burned down 1981. Widow moved east. No body ever recovered. And below that, in smaller writing, almost like a note someone had added and later tried to erase, still heard on Alder Road. I sat there for a while, reading it over and over. Then I saw the map. The old logging routes north of town had been marked in pencil. 1 line, barely visible, led past the abandoned mill, past the ridge, and into a stretch of forest the locals now called Mercer's Cut. I asked the kid at the desk about it. He made a face. "That's just a nickname." "Sure." "No, seriously. It's just what people call the area." "Why?" He lowered his voice. "Because whenever somebody goes up there at night, they come back talking like they saw a man with an axe." "Do they?" He shrugged. "Usually they come back not talking." That was the exact moment I should have gone home. Instead, I took my uncle's old truck, filled it with gas, and drove up the service road toward Mercer's Cut an hour before sunset. It wasn't because I was brave. It was because I was tired of feeling like somebody else was controlling the edges of my life. The road got worse the farther I went. Gravel gave way to mud, then to ruts lined with frost-blackened brush. The trees crowded in close on both sides. No cell signal, no other cars, just the truck, the road, and the sound of dead leaves scraping along the undercarriage. I found the old campsite just after dusk. There was a clearing, half swallowed by moss and blackberry vines, with the remains of a shack on one side and a rotted stump table in the middle. Someone had nailed a rusted tin sign to a tree. No trespassing. As if that mattered. There were fresh chips on the ground near the stump. Fresh. I killed the engine and sat there listening. Nothing. Then, from deeper in the trees, I heard a boot scrape over frozen dirt, not a branch snapping, a human step. I stepped out of the truck, every nerve in my body buzzing, and swept the flashlight beam around the clearing. The light caught a shape between 2 cedars, a man standing still as a post. He was huge, wrapped in what looked like an old wool coat, the kind loggers wore when winter came early. His face was hidden by shadow, but I could make out the pale shine of his beard and the glint of something metal in his right hand. An axe. My mouth went dry. "Hello?" I called, and immediately hated myself for it. The man didn't move. Then he said, in that same rough, tired voice I'd heard behind the house, "You shouldn't be here." I took one step back. He shifted slightly, and the flashlight beam slid across his face. I wish I could tell you I saw a monster. I didn't. I saw a man. That was worse. His skin was gray-white, like old bark in moonlight. One side of his face looked caved in near the jaw, as if a tree limb or machine had crushed it years ago. His eyes were dark and sunken, but not empty. There was something in them, something aware, something furious. "Who are you?" I managed. He looked at me a long moment, then lifted the axe and pointed past me toward the truck. "Go home." The voice was close now, close enough to hear the wet click in his throat when he breathed. "Is your name Eli Mercer?" He tilted his head. For 1 second I thought he was going to answer. Instead he said, "He's buried where the roots can't reach." Then the lights on my truck blew out all at once, not dimmed, not flickered, just died, and the clearing went so dark I couldn't see my own hands. I ran. I don't know how far I made it before I realized the road wasn't under my feet anymore. I remember branches tearing at my jacket, mud sucking at my boots, my lungs burning like somebody had packed them with glass. And I remember the chopping, right behind me, not always close, sometimes far, sometimes to the left, sometimes above me, as if the sound were moving from tree to tree. Then a lantern appeared through the dark. The same yellow glow. I nearly screamed. The lantern moved toward me, steady as a metronome. I could see the outline of a hand holding it. Rough fingers, split knuckles, blackened nails. The man's voice said, very softly now, "Too late." Then the lantern was gone, and I was on my hands and knees in the mud at the edge of the road, half a mile from where I'd left the truck. The engine was dead when I got back, but there was no damage, no broken wires, no smashed battery, nothing, except the driver's side window was down. I had definitely closed it. On the seat was a thin sliver of wood, carved into a tiny curl like the shavings from a fresh cut. Wrapped around it was a strip of cloth from an old wool shirt. I didn't sleep that night. At sunrise, I drove straight to my aunt's house and started asking her what she hadn't told me. She was in the recliner by the window, pale and exhausted, one hand shaking in her lap. When I showed her the wood shaving, she closed her eyes. "So it started," she whispered. "What started?" She stared at me for a second and I could see it then. Not just fear, guilt. That pissed me off more than the haunting did. "You knew," I said. "You knew about this." She looked out the window. "Your grandpa did timber work out here before I was born," she said. "Long time ago. He used to talk about Mercer." "My grandfather?" She nodded. "Did he know him?" "No," she said. "Not personally, but he worked the same routes. Said Mercer wasn't the kind of man who got along with bosses." "June." She swallowed hard. "There was an accident up on the ridge. That's what they said. One of the crews hit unstable ground. A section of the cut collapsed. Mercer disappeared in it." "Okay." "But after that, 3 men quit. One moved out of state, one drank himself to death, and one," she said, her voice thinning, "swore Mercer came to his cabin 2 nights in a row asking for help digging." I just stared at her. "You're joking." "No." "Did anyone check the cabin?" She laughed once, a small broken sound. "Ben, people around here learned a long time ago not to check too closely if they wanted to sleep at night." I took a breath. "So, what do you know?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said, "They never found the body because they didn't want to." That landed harder than anything else so far. "What does that mean?" She shut her eyes. It means there are things this town buried and called it weather. I went cold. Who? She looked right at me then, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. The mill owner, the sheriff, a few of the men from the crew. Your grandfather too, if he told me the truth. What truth? June's mouth trembled. Mercer found something up there. Something no one was supposed to see. He came back down the ridge angry, carrying a ledger, saying he was going to talk to the state. That was the last time anybody saw him alive. I felt my throat tighten. What ledger? She shook her head. I don't know, but after he vanished, the sheriff told everybody to forget it. Then the mill burned a year later, and the owner's family moved away. I stared at her. You're telling me people just lived with this? She gave me a flat, tired look. Son, this is a town built on living with things. That night I did something stupider than going up to Mercer's cut. I went to the burned out remains of the old mill. The whole place was fenced off and half collapsed, but there was a side entrance where the boards had rotted through enough for a man to slip inside. I used a flashlight and a pry bar and pushed through a corridor lined with peeling warning signs and water-stained concrete. The smell in there was awful. Wet ash, mold, old oil, and underneath it all, that same sharp scent of sap. The main floor was a cathedral of ruined machines, giant rusted blades, conveyor belts hanging like dead vines, shadows everywhere. Then I heard it. Not chopping this time, typing. I froze. It came from one of the office rooms in the back. I moved toward it, every nerve screaming at me to stop. The sound got louder as I got closer, a slow mechanical clack from within the dark. I reached the doorway and shined the flashlight inside. The room was empty, except for the desk. On the desk sat an old manual typewriter, and on the page in it, half finished, were 2 words: Ben Carter. I nearly dropped the flashlight. The paper was yellowed and brittle, like it had been there for decades, but the letters were fresh, pressed hard into the page as if someone had typed them moments ago. Then, behind me, I heard a voice say, very clearly, "You've got his hands." I spun around. Nothing. The room was empty, but the air had changed, colder, thicker. I looked back at the typewriter and saw that another line had appeared. Come upstairs. There was no way I was typing myself out of that one. I backed out of the room and nearly collided with the office wall, and that's when I saw the staircase hidden behind a sheet of hanging plastic. It led down, not up, into a maintenance cellar beneath the mill. I don't know why I went. Curiosity maybe, or panic, or the ugly human urge to see the thing that's already ruined your night. The basement was low-ceilinged and cramped, lined with old pipes and broken shelving. At the far end was a steel door, half covered in rust, and hanging on the door, nailed through the top hinge, was an axe, not a modern one, an old hand axe with a worn wooden haft. The handle was carved with initials, EM. I reached for it without thinking. The moment my fingers touched the wood, a memory hit me so hard I almost fell. A sound first, a man screaming. Then the smell of wet pine and hot metal. Then a flash of a face. Not Mercer's, my grandfather's. Not as an old man either. Younger, strong, wearing the same kind of wool coat, standing in snow beside the log chute, looking terrified. I jerked my hand away like the axe had burned me. From behind the steel door came a knock, 3 slow raps. Then a voice, muffled but unmistakable, said, "Open it." I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe a minute, maybe an hour. Eventually, I did what every bad decision in horror stories is built on. I opened the door. Inside was a narrow storage chamber lined with shelves. Most of it had caved in from water damage. At the back sat a metal filing cabinet, half buried under debris. The top drawer was already open. Inside was a ledger wrapped in oilcloth. I took it out and opened it with shaking hands. At first it looked like payroll records, dates, names, shifts, worksite notes. Then I saw the margins, small handwritten remarks, jammed beside the official entries. Too much is going up the ridge. Sheriff knows. Do not sign. Tell June if I don't come back. The handwriting changed halfway through the book. Different pen, different pressure. Same words, repeated over and over on several pages. He is not dead. I turned the page and found a clipped newspaper photo of the crew from 1979, the same one from the archive. But this copy had notes scribbled on the back. Top row, third from left, J. Carter. That was my grandfather. I stared at it, not processing, not wanting to. Then I noticed the second name, standing just behind Mercer, Ben Carter, my own name. I laughed once because my brain had simply given up on reality by then. That's not possible, I said out loud. Behind me, the basement door creaked shut. I turned slowly. Eli Mercer stood in the doorway. Up close, he was even worse. Not rotten, not monstrous. Just wrong is the way something can be wrong when it has stayed in one place too long. His coat hung in soaked strips. His hands were enormous, knotted with scars. One sleeve was dark with old blood or old sap. I couldn't tell which. He looked at the ledger in my hands, then at me, and for the first time, he smiled. It was not a kind expression. You finally came back, he said. I couldn't speak. He took one step closer, and the air in the cellar dropped 20 degrees. You've got the Carter face, he said, but you sound like your mother. What do you want? I whispered. He tilted his head. What? I was promised. I should have run. Maybe I could have. Instead, I held up the ledger like a shield. What is this? His eyes flicked down to the page with my name. That's the bill, he said. And then the whole basement shuddered, not from impact, from movement, like the building itself had inhaled. The shelves rattled. Dust fell. Somewhere above us, wood cracked loud enough to make me flinch. Mercer looked past me toward the far wall. Too late, he said again, but this time it sounded almost bored. Then he raised one arm and pointed at the ledger. That's why I kept coming. I swallowed hard. Coming where? He leaned in just enough that I could smell the cold earth on him. Home. And then he was gone. Not faded, not dissolved, just gone, like someone had blown out a candle. The basement door slammed open. I ran. I don't remember the drive home, only the sound of the ledger sliding on the passenger seat every time I took a turn. I didn't tell June what I'd seen. Not then. I couldn't. Her face had gone even whiter when I got back, and when she looked at the ledger, her eyes filled with tears. That's what he wanted, she said. You knew about this book? She nodded slowly. Your grandfather brought something home once. Said if anybody ever came asking, to burn it. What happened? She looked at me for a long time before answering. He never let me read it. I should have burned the ledger that night. Instead, I made the worst mistake of all. I read the last page. The final entry wasn't a payroll note or a work order. It was a list of names. Mercer, Hale, Danner, Kessler, Carter, my family, the old-timers, the people who'd been part of keeping quiet. And under those names, in the same fresh handwriting I'd seen on the typewriter, was a line written in ink so dark it looked almost wet. Next of kin, Benjamin Carter. I sat there in the kitchen with the ledger open, staring at that line until my eyes burned. Then, from outside I heard chopping, not in the woods, at the front door. 3 strikes, slow, heavy, certain. I looked through the window and saw the lantern glow on the porch. A man stood there holding it. He raised his free hand and knocked once with the back of his knuckles. Then I heard my own voice from the porch say, "Ben, open up." I nearly passed out. The voice was mine. Exactly mine. Same pitch. Same tired Oregon drawl I'd never really noticed until that second. I backed away from the window so fast I knocked over a chair. The porch light came on. No one was there. But on the glass, fogged from the outside, someone had written 4 words with a finger. "You were always here." I don't know how long after that I left town. I know I packed fast. I know I threw the ledger into the stove and watched it blacken and curl and somehow still not fully burn. I know I drove south until sunrise with my hands locked on the wheel and my heart pounding like it wanted out. I told myself I was done with Black Hollow, that I'd never go back, that I'd never think about Eli Mercer again. But a month later, I got a voicemail from my Aunt June. Her voice was weak, shaky, but still unmistakable. "Ben," she said, "listen to me. Don't answer if he calls your name. And if you hear chopping in the house, don't look for the man. Look for the place he's standing." That message ended with a burst of static. Then, right before the call cut off, another voice came through the background. Low, rough, male. "Tell him I'm home." I reported the whole thing to the sheriff, half expecting them to laugh me out of the station. Instead, the deputy on duty went pale when I mentioned Mercer's cut. He didn't write anything down. He just asked one question. "Did he see your face?" I went cold. What kind of question is that? The deputy swallowed. Because if he did, then this isn't over. I left before he could say another word. June died 2 weeks later. At the funeral, Ruth from the diner squeezed my arm and said, "You're not the first one he's picked out, you know." I stared at her. She nodded toward the trees beyond the cemetery fence. Mercer comes when somebody in town gets too close to the truth. Always has. What truth? She looked at me with something like pity. That he never left. Only the body did. I didn't understand what she meant until I got home and found an envelope shoved through my apartment door. No return address. Inside was a photograph. The same logging crew photo from 1979. Only now there was something different. One of the men in the back row had turned his face toward the camera. It was me, not my father, not a resemblance. Me. Same scar on my chin, same eyes, same jacket I'd worn to the funeral. Printed on the back, in that same hard old-fashioned handwriting, were 3 words, "Welcome to the cut." I still have the photo. I shouldn't. Every time I try to throw it away, it ends up somewhere else. Once on the kitchen table, once under my pillow, once in my jacket pocket after I checked it twice, and 3 nights ago, while I was sitting alone in the dark trying not to listen to the chopping outside my apartment, I heard a knock on the ceiling above me. 3 slow raps. Then a voice muffled by plaster and distance said, "Ben, open up." I haven't slept much since, because now I know what the town was hiding. It wasn't just that Eli Mercer died in those woods. It was that the woods kept him, and every so often, when somebody with the wrong blood comes back to Black Hollow, the forest lets him out long enough to collect what was promised. The worst part. I don't think he was ever hunting me. I think he was bringing me home. And if that sounds insane, I get it. I really do. But last night, after I finally gave up pretending I could ignore it, I went into my hallway and found a strip of fresh pine shavings on the floor, long, pale, still damp. Right beside them was a single footprint, barefoot, my size, facing toward my bedroom door.